You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. Just a heads up, this episode is brought to you by my book, The Guide for Every Screenwriter, which has been listed as one of the best screenwriting books of all time by the Book Authority. If you're looking for something that reveals the secrets of screenwriting in an easy to understand and engaging way, then this is the book for you. You can find The Guide for Every Screenwriter at thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com/books now. On to the show. Welcome to the podcast. We have on an amazing guest. This gentleman has directed such shows as The Wire, The Sopranos, Lost, The Boys, and dozens of other household names that are great shows. This is Dan Attias. Dan, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, Geoffrey, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I got a copy of your book, Directing Great Television. And as a screenwriter, I thought it was really important bring you on the show. Let's talk screenwriter, director, and how we can kind of figure out the relationship there of what a screenwriter could expect from a director, and also what directing television is like, because I know it is completely different than directing a feature.
Well, it's completely different and completely the same. There's so many things that are identical, and that the director in both mediums is responsible for getting the performance,
right,
for dealing with the actors, for staging the scene, for working with the director of photography and determining what the shot will be, for determining what angles are needed to capture a particular scene, in anticipating of how it will be edited, is responsible, just go on for a little bit more, is responsible for holding a vision of the story being told, and being able to communicate that to a battalion of collaborators
right,
who are there to help but need guidance. So in that respect, it's the same job. The main differences are, I would say, two in particular. One, of course, is the time constraint.
Right.
A feature might have, weeks or months to prepare, and weeks or not even months, and perhaps months and months to shoot. An hour-long episode is typically shot is prepped between, I'd say, 7 and 9 days, and shot in about the same, maybe
That's
8,
incredible.
10 or 11. So you can see how condensed the process is, that's one main difference. But the other difference, which might really be something we can talk about and is very interesting to me, is the relationship between the director and the writer. Because in features, it's generally understood that the director is king in many respects.
Yeah, right.
This is breaking down a bit with things like the Marvel universe, where there's a lot of top-down stuff from the corporate structure of Marvel.
No, I want to touch back on all of that, because it's actually a really great point. But before we launch into this, I want to get a little bit of your origin story, and I'm going to ask specifically because what I really appreciate about your book is it's not overly textbooky. I don't feel like I'm sitting in a college class. I feel like I'm reading this book and I'm getting to know you and I'm understanding your process, which makes it an easy read. So if you can give me a little bit of your origin story that kind of led you into directing for television, and then I want to circle back so we can discuss, what directing for television is like now.
Sounds good. Well, let's see. I've always been interested in the arts. I've always read a lot. I've always gone to movies. I've enjoyed television. I was an English major in college. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Got accepted into law school. And
oh, really?
Yeah. Realized before I started that it wasn't for me. So I first deferred my admission, and then I just let it fly, let it go. And really as a way of, I've always been introspective and trying to figure out, why we're here, who I am, what's the meaning of it all. And art has always been kind of a way to really explore some of those subjects. And I gravitated before I kind of knew what I wanted to do, I gravitated towards taking acting classes after college.
Oh,
Really primarily to kind of loosen myself up, learn to kind of be a little more playful in my internal experience. And what that led to was I became enamored of the process. And for about 3 years, I was determined I'm going to be an actor. And I studied with some wonderful teachers, most famously Stella Adler.
oh, wow.
She taught Marlon Brando. And then in Los Angeles, there was a wonderful blacklisted actor who made a great career teaching named Jeff Corey. I studied with him. And that's what I was really committed to. I acted in some theater, but I discovered that that it was very difficult for me because I understood scenes analytically very well. I had a good intuitive sense of where the digging needed to be done, where the exploration was, what stories how they operated at a deeper level. But it was more challenging to me to be able to kind of reconfigure my emotional my persona, to kind of abandon the kind of way I relate to the world to kind of inform the character. I was a little tightly wound. And I found that was one of the appeals of doing the acting, was to loosen me up a little bit.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I discovered through some steps I don't need to describe, but I had to make a short film. I was in a graduate program at film school and wanting to take acting workshops, but for some odd reason, I was in a critical studies program, but I had to make a film.
Okay.
And this short film was an epiphany for me because, first of all, I found I was much freer directing other actors. And, it's funny, there's a sports metaphor that kind of applies to me here. Often in professional sports, the best managers are former players, but not the great players. They're usually the ones who had struggled to kind of stay in the majors. They say they might have come up for a cup of coffee in baseball, but they couldn't last, or they hung on just for a few years, or they were a catcher where they really had to the game. But what's the metaphor is, or the analogy is, when you're blocked when you're not perhaps as talented as others, you have to really use your own ingenuity to understand the game. And you develop a great knowledge of it. And I think in acting, the troubles I had in kind of accessing my full emotional life led me to develop kinds of techniques to try to access it myself, so that when I work with actors who have more of an open channel, I have all kinds of ways to suggest to help them. So I think that was actually my best training. And it gave me compassion and empathy for actors, because in many ways they are the most vulnerable of any of us. And they're in many ways the most courageous, because we ask them to experience feelings most of us don't want to have. I mean, you don't get to play the hero in your life. In stories, you're asked to, we want to see stories about people down on their luck or suffering great loss. And the best actors really make that a part of their experience. So they're willing to feel things most of us don't feel. And having had experience acting myself, I have a great, as I say, compassion and empathy, and I think way to communicate with actors. And I think they sense that too, that I understand what they're up against. So I made this film, and also the editing process was another epiphany, because I saw that, by joining two pieces of film together, an emotion was elicited. A response happened within me. And if I could monitor those responses that was happening to me as I was assembling the film, I could pretty reliably count on the fact that others watching the film would have the same response.
Yeah.
So it became a profound experience in that I knew, wow, I could communicate to others how I see. It's like I could create an internal experience in someone else by, monitoring my own internal experience. If I got a film, this is how it feels. This is how this moment feels.
Yeah.
And so that was just exhilarating. And so I committed to being a director. And how I got work is a whole other story. I don't know if you want to get into it. But
well, just listening to your path and the amount of insightful knowledge and nuggets of really brilliance that you're just dropping. And just these past, I'm sitting here in awe taking notes, because it is amazing. Like, it sounds like you have a beautiful working relationship with actors. It doesn't sound like you're that dictator, like director out there telling people to do it exactly how it is. It sounds like you let them explore their emotions and you create that moment for them, which is beautiful. And where you touched me just now is like, I'm a dyslexic screenwriter, so I'm self-taught autodidact. I wasn't able to go to college and figure it out, and I had to go through and really teach myself the process and the structure of screenwriting, which I was able to relay in my book. And so doing that, it allowed me the ability to speak to other writers that were struggling as well, and to come from that knowledge. And so I have a deep, profound respect for someone like yourself, who is able to kind of go through that grinder and really figure it out. Because I think it's people like us that really elevate the craft. Whereas you can have somebody who's naturally gifted, but when you have someone who comes into the knowledge because they've earned it, I think those are the people that you should be learning from. So the fact that you're able to put this into a book is absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you, Geoffrey. Let me just pick up on a couple of things too that I think are important, and I sense you would as well. That, the creative process is it's mysterious. You're in the process of birthing something that doesn't exist. You're trying to bring something that doesn't exist and make it real. I mean, in my experience, if you have all the answers going in, it's not going to be necessarily that exciting a project. The best projects are things that happen, that occur. I've heard some filmmakers actually say how much they love when accidents happen on a set in a scene. Because that's when truth kind of makes its appearance, because it's unpremeditated. It's something that's just happened.
Right.
And so, when you approach something with arrogance, like I'm the only one who knows how this is, and just do it. what you're doing is you're cutting off your collaborators from their resources, and therefore you're cutting yourself off from those resources of others.
Right.
It's like, when you're so one of the things I'll just jump to, kind of considering, since this is a podcast I know primarily for writers, it's so interesting to me that, we're all interpreting the story, and we're all collaborating on it. And writers have, are at the genesis of it. They, have the idea, and they take it as far as they can take it, and they hand it over. And then, it's my job as a director to translate it, to interpret it through, but I can only do that through my own unique vessel. Through what strikes me.
Yeah, through your lens.
Yeah, and on top of that, I feel like series television directing is kind of fascinating in many ways to me, because I have to connect to like an ongoing story, and there's so many givens. But I, discovered pretty early that unless I can find a way personally to care about the story that's being told, I'm not going to be able to make anybody else care about it. And it's only by that care. So I have to, can I direct effectively? Can I open? Not only that, it's only in that way can I connect to my own deeper resources, which are not conscious, but there's something I am struggling with clearly, or I'm interested in. And that curiosity is what feeds, me in knowing what might be an interesting choice. And that also translates to the creativity of others, so that the writer, presents me with a script, and we can maybe talk about the dialogue between director and writer, because that's interesting. And then when I take it, I'm dealing with others who are translating it. I mean, I have to develop my own vision for what's the story being told, which is, to me, a fascinating subject we could spend the whole podcast on, because the story is not simply what happened. It's the meaning that we ascribe to it. It's where we place the emphasis, where we, what significance, where we point the audience to pay attention to. What is at issue? What is the subtext that's really, moving this whole story? But actors, it's like, this is why I think it's unfortunate when directors just mandate how something should be played.
Yeah.
Even though I, as the director, have a responsibility for it, I have to say, yes, that's appropriate, that's advancing the story. If I don't succeed in creating an environment where the actor feels open to his or her own resources and can come forward, then I'm so cut off from what they might bring to a story.
Yeah.
They might understand the intention and the needs of the scene, but come up with a startling, interesting, fascinating way to embody it, that if I haven't invited them to contribute, I will never see. That's not to say I take every suggestion. That's the job of the director. I have to hold the vision and see what applies and what doesn't. So anyway, I've kind of gone a little far afield here. So
no, we're fine. No, I think it's good. It makes sense. I mean, in the end, the vision and the tone of the script, it's falling in your hands. So you're daily weighing pros and cons, what works, what doesn't work. So you have to field everybody's thoughts and input. I mean, it sounds like an incredibly a difficult job, but something that you mentioned that really got me, because this is my process. And so it's validating to hear someone like yourself say, when I come onto a project, I have to care about the character. I have to care about the journey. Because when I get onto a project, when I am brought on to do a rewrite for someone or fix a script that's going into production because it's a mess, I have to find something about that character's journey I can become emotionally invested in, so that I can allow myself to be vulnerable during the process and bring some heart to it. And to hear someone like yourself mention that, who has been on some of the biggest shows on television, it's a wonderful thing to hear. Like, that is the right way to do it.
Well, it is, and it's not always fun. It can be very challenging, because when you get on a project, as I'm sure you've had the experiences I have, when you're on something and you're presented with material that just doesn't excite you, and you're knocking your head against the wall, how can I get excited about it? It's still incumbent to do your best. It's like I cut my teeth on episodic directing way back in the early 90s with the original Beverly Hills 90210.
Really?
And I directed like 20 of those.
And were you emotionally invested in that show?
I have to be. And it's funny. I have to fall in love with the story I'm telling, and I have to. That's where my acting experience, I think, has really assisted me, because as an actor, there's so many givens. You say, okay, this is your character. This is what they do. This is what they say. This is their friend. This is, it's like you're given all these kind of things that just seem, they could be constraining. But in reality, you can look at it not as limitations, but as opportunities. And actors have to be able to, the best actors have to be able to find themselves within that role. That's not to say that the character should be like them. That's not right. It's very different.
Right.
But they have to find the humanity of the character they're playing, including, interestingly, loathsome characters, villains. You can't play a bad guy and be credible.
Yeah.
That means you're outside the character commenting on it. And an audience knows that. An audience picks up, this is not authentic behavior.
Yeah.
You have to find out from your own experience. Imagine what circumstances, what history, what beliefs would I have to hold in order to do the things this character does. And in a funny, similar way, when I'm presented with a script, even like Beverly Hills 90210, which, funnily enough, in its day was the cutting edge show. It's kind of funny. You have to put yourself in that sensibility, in that mindset. Yeah. What was high school like? What was I like in high school? What are the, and so anyway, it's all.
Well, did you have to deal with because you brought this point up, did you have to deal with an actor who was potentially miscast so that they had a hard time embodying the humanity or finding themselves in that character?
This does happen. And what I always regard it as a kind of fun challenge, even though at times it can be infuriating if I think, oh my goodness, I got saddled with someone who's not right for this.
Right.
I always find it a fascinating challenge to be able to create the kind of imaginary circumstances for that actor so that he or she might be willing to do something very far from the way they present themselves in life. Because I think really if you can create, I keep calling them imaginary circumstances. I hope your audience kind of knows what that means, but it's
we get it.
It's like, well, I don't know. I'm just pulling this out. It's not a great example, but it's one I happen to use in a different context in my chapter on getting the performance. I talk about how sometimes you really have to fill in things for actors, like
kind of give them a background.
Yeah, or give them or fill out, like, for example, if a character has just been passed up for a promotion and there's been nothing. Often you can look in the script and point to things that you can help the actor kind of find things. But if they show up in the next scene and there's no real inner life and they haven't really processed it all, I might say to them, okay, so you were passed up for promotion. I want you to imagine that in that 3 days that's in that week since that's happened, you haven't been able to sleep. You're sure you're about to be fired. You're worried your kids who are just middle of high school, and you're not going to be able to pay for college. In fact, you even go so far as to imagine you're not going to get it. You're going to be fired. You're not going to be hired again because you'll get bad references, and you might wind up homeless.
Yeah.
I mean, what would if you start thinking about all those things?
I'm ready to play that part.
Yeah. Right. So if you think of all those things, suddenly you're going to bring a different inner life to it. So
that makes
when an
sense.
actor isn't right for the part, you have to, work with them to find, say, their inner strengths, and ways they could imagine themselves in ways they generally don't.
All right, well, let's circle back to the relationship between director and writer, because I know you wanted to explore that. And I'm really interested in, as a writer myself, if you're writing for television and the script is provided, you come on as the director to the show. We'll say you've already had the tone meeting. And if people need to know what that is, that's where the director meets with the producers of the show to say, hey, this is how we make the show. And then you have the incredibly difficult job of being able to match the tone of a show that you're new to. Right. But how does that work working with a writer?
Well, I love, for the most part, I love working with writers because and especially in series television, because, it's not a situation like you might have developed a feature script with a writer and you guys are exchanging thoughts and you're accommodating one another and you emerge with this product. I'm coming on to a show. I mean, and it doesn't matter if it's an outstanding show or a not so outstanding show, you generally do not get the script. You have to say, let's say you have 7 days to prepare it. And by preparing it, meaning you have to pick all the locations, you have to figure out how you're going to shoot it, you have to cast the
7 days.
It's very, very quick.
Wow.
So script analysis, you find the time to do that when you're not having to do all the other logistical things you have to do. But you don't even get the script. I mean, in the best case, you get the script a week before you start. Often you don't get it until a day or two before you start. So, when you're working with talented people, which is, I've been fortunate to do on many occasions, they've spent a lot of time thinking about it and they put a lot of thought into it. And, I've already by that time really familiarized myself with the show, tried to immerse myself in the world of the show. Because you alluded to, the fact that every show is different, has its own tone and sensibility. I sometimes think of it as metaphorically, it's like every show has its own language. My job is to learn that language so I can then speak it in my voice. You don't want mimicry.
That's
you want
brilliant.
to understand, okay, what are the parameters? Okay, now I get it. This is the visual language. This is the lens, the kind of lenses we use. This is the kind of tone and sensibility. Got all that. Okay, now the story I'm telling is this particular story, and how do I feel, what's important to me, and how can I utilize these tools? I regard them as tools, as grammar and alphabet and all that vocabulary.
Wow.
So I will immerse myself as fully as I can for many, many reasons. First of all, the story I'm telling is part of a larger fabric.
Yeah.
So I can't tell it well if I'm not aware of everything that's preceded, of where these characters come from, what their history is. And it helps me too. And I will ask writers this often. It's like, where is the story going after my episode? I'd like to know, I'd like to help reverse engineer things for them also and kind of, assist in the storytelling going forward. So I love connecting to writers right away. And really, I make use of the tone meeting. I love to have the tone meeting as early in the prep as possible, because the more I can understand about the subtext of each scene, the point of view of each scene, what the character arcs are that they had in mind, all of that will inform my creative choices. So if I'm making prep decisions without this kind of knowledge, now producers rely on directors to kind of form a lot of their own impressions themselves and bring themselves, which I do also, but I really do love mining from the writer everything I can get. Tell me everything in your mind.
So you're open to a dialogue with the writer.
I need it. I want it.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's enriching. I wouldn't say my toolbox, but in a certain sense, it's enriching what I can draw upon. Because when I get into the moment of directing the scene, I don't know where I'm going to necessarily what's going to strike me as useful in moving an actor from one choice to the choice that I think is going to move the story forward.
Right.
So, so there's that kind of part of my relationship with writers, which I like a great deal. Then once I learn all this, or once I read the material and have my own impressions about what fascinates me about it,
right,
I find out if that was perhaps not something that the writers particularly cared about, but it might be something I care a lot about.
Interesting.
So then I'll maybe make suggestions. I'll say, knowing we don't have a lot of time to
right. You've only got a couple of days, right?
Yeah, but I think part of my job is not just asking for the moon, but maybe coming up with suggestions. Like, for example, like I was doing an episode of The Americans, and which I did several of those, and I loved the show, and the writers, had I think it was maybe the last one I did, the last season, perhaps.
Yeah, my wife was addicted to that show.
Yeah. And it's for your listeners who don't know the show, it's a Soviet sleeper cell, spy couple that live in DC in the 1980s. And at one point, Philip, the husband, is withdrawing. He's going in separate directions from his wife, Elizabeth, Matthew Rhys and Kerry Russell. And you see it shows that he makes a very dramatic choice to oppose her in some critical way.
Okay.
And the script simply showed the before and after of it. And when they told me what it was, and I viewed it, I said, boy, that's fascinating. I really wish we could have a moment where we could see how difficult this is for Philip. So I'm thinking, after they said, well, here's this argument that they have.
Yeah.
And, where he's asking for something, she's disagreeing. And then the next time you see him, he's gone ahead and done the thing she didn't want him to do and all that.
Right.
I said, wouldn't it be nice to have a moment where we see the difficulty of these things? So wouldn't it be nice and it just occurred to me, how about just a simple moment where, after that argument, she's gone to bed and he's shaving, he's just shaving in the mirror in the bathroom, and he steps out and he sees her asleep. And he's right on the cusp of this choice. And we can just see in his face the difficulty as he looks at her. And we get a sense that what he's struggling with, and we get a sense perhaps of how he's going to choose. But we see him in process. So
I love it.
So then they immediately loved it. They said, that's great. That's great.
That is good.
That's a wonderful example of how, you can bring something. It's probably not unlike something you experience in the writer's room.
Yeah.
When the writing process is happening. Someone might have said that, but a director has the opportunity to, suggest those kind of things.
And there's no dialogue.
And there's no dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a powerful moment on the character, and you can see it. And that's through your vision that you're able to show that. And I could see why that would work.
While we're on this, let me just give one more wrinkle in this relationship, because I so loved working on The Americans, and these two showrunners, Joel Fields and Joe Weisberg, were, I think, wonderful, wonderful showrunners, partly because, not just because they wrote great scripts, but because of their humility and their interest in making the best possible show and not having to be credited for every moment. I've worked on a lot of shows where you're dealing with that kind of ego.
Oh,
and
wow.
And by the way, there are many directors who have that, and I'm not immune from having egotistical concerns as well.
Well, we're all human here.
Exactly. And but these guys in particular are wonderful collaborators and respectful of what others can bring, and they were very encouraging and respectful of my input. And I had an interesting story that I do talk about in the book. It's in the chapter on The Americans.
Okay.
Can I take a moment and just to describe it, because I think it shows something about the relationship between writers and directors as well.
I mean, I insist.
Okay. Good. So in this particular episode of The Americans, I think it was the second to last season. Again, so you have this conflict in the marital situation, household, as I mentioned. Philip is kind of questioning a lot more his allegiance to this kind of Soviet spy ethic and all that. And Elizabeth is a true believer still, and Philip is even pursuing, God forbid, spiritual concerns, which, in atheistic Russia is like,
that's not good.
Really, you're off the reservation. So he's questioning a great deal. And in this particular episode I was handed. I read it. It was a very good script, a lot of really great things. But there was one scene in it that just stuck out like a sore thumb. And it was, to me, and it was a scene where Philip, the characters frequently appear in disguises because they have to be,
Okay.
So Philip is in disguise. He goes to a hospital where there is a priest waiting. We've never met the guy. Philip comes up to him, and what you learn is he's there to debrief this priest, who is another, who's also working for the KGB. And the ostensible story is this. Philip and Elizabeth have had for the previous seasons, they have different, what you call a handler, who is the intermediary between the KGB and the agents in the field. First couple of seasons, it was Margot Martindale, a great actress. And then the next couple of seasons, it was another great actor, Frank Langella.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Langella's character was very close to Philip and Elizabeth and was very privy to all of this conflict in the marriage and in the values, because he would get pushback from Philip often when he'd say, you've got to do this, which is going to involve killing this person or whatever. And Philip is starting to have questions. And, if you oppose the KGB, you're not in the safest of situations. And,
right.
And Langella had been an intermediary because he truly cared about both people. But now he's left the show. He's left New York or Washington, D.C. is where it was. And so you learn, was not the handler simply for Philip and Elizabeth, but for other agents in the field. And he would debrief them.
Gotcha.
So this scene was meant to be, in the absence of Langella, Philip was going around to his other clients and getting information. And that was it, right? And that's what was happening. Only you knew nothing about this priest. You had never seen it before. And the scene was Philip kind of meeting this guy. They have some cryptic greeting like, are you doing well today, Father? Or, yes, very well. Or, how are you? Or something that is obviously code. So you understand, okay, they don't know each other, they've never met, and now they're going to have a conversation. And the priest proceeds to speak about a page and a half of dialogue.
Whoa.
Confusing report on other characters we know nothing about.
Yeah.
He's been spying on other priests within whatever you call it.
Were they trying to set up future episodes or something?
That was my question exactly. So anyway, they speak, and it's like, you have to kind of follow it, because this guy is saying, well, this is what I saw. I'm not sure if it's important or not, but, I'm really not doing it for myself. I'm just saying, and then Philip says, well, thank you very much. I'm going to go. And the priest says, well, wait, will I see you again? And Philip says, no, there'll probably be a permanent replacement coming soon, but so I doubt it. And he says, well, it would be nice to see you again. I mean, Frank, I forget Frank Langella's character's name, but he always said it was important to him that we do these things. And Philip said, I really can't, and he leaves, right? Yeah. So I'm thinking, okay, and so in the tone meeting, I asked the writers. I said, so what's happening here? I mean, is this information that's going to become relevant in future episodes? And they said no.
Okay.
Said, we've never met this guy before, right? And they said, right, no. And so I said, so what would you say, since I'll be having to direct this particular scene with these actors, what would you say are their intentions here? What's going on? And they said, well, and they gave me this explanation. They said, well, we think it's interesting that in this period in the Soviet Union, the Russian Orthodox priests weren't allowed to emigrate and practice their religion and all that outside the country unless they also worked for the KGB.
Right.
And we think that's interesting. And I said, well, that is interesting. It's a nice historical footnote, but I'm not sure it sustains interest in the scene, or that we understand why it's taking up so much real estate.
Yeah. A big exposition there.
Yeah. And they said, well, and I said, so why? And what is he? So what's Philip's intention? What does he want? Is it essentially he's just going to get this information and get out of there? And they said, yeah, that's right. And I said, okay. And what's the priest's motivation? What's at issue for him? And he says, well, we think that these priests probably, were very cut off from their friends. He probably really depended on this guy. Langella is probably the only one he could be honest with. And he probably wants a friend. He's missed his friend, and he probably wants Philip to, be his friend. And I
Gotcha.
said, and that's what he's doing. He says, yeah. I said, that imploring, do you want to, I see you again? Yeah, that's what that's about. And I left really unsatisfied. I didn't leave until I found the clincher. And I kept questioning, well, this doesn't really feel like I think the audience is not going to be terribly interested in this. And they said, well, and then they revealed the real reason for the priest. They said, well, in the next episode, Philip is going to surprise his wife by having arranged a real Russian, Soviet-sanctioned wedding, because they were never really married. They were right, and it would be a private thing. No one would know it but they. And he needs a real priest to perform it. So we have to introduce this character.
Gotcha.
And I think, okay, so this scene is here for the next episode. So it can be a convenient reality.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, but I'm directing this episode, and I want to keep people interested in this episode. I knew I had to serve the show. I had to deliver this. I couldn't say, I'm not doing it. No, you can't do that. Okay. It's okay. We got to establish this priest. But it bored the hell out of me.
What a challenge.
But, yeah. So I couldn't really figure anything out, but I thought, well, not all scenes are going to be great. So we get to the day of shooting, and, we rehearse it. I get the actors there. I discuss, their motivations, their intentions, just as they were described to me in the tone meeting. I say, Matthew, I think, Philip, you just kind of want to get in and get out. This is not anything you're really invested in, but you're performing this job. And I spoke to the actor playing the priest. I said, and you're by yourself, and this is kind of poignant. You've lost this relationship with Langella, and you lament that and hoping you can replace it. And I say, okay. So we stage something, and the actors go off to get final makeup, and I have about 15 minutes for it to be lit. And I'm sitting there thinking, I really don't like
So,
this.
I mean, we're talking up to like shooting. This is on your mind.
Yeah. And I just don't want to let it go. And I start thinking, then this is the kind of question I have to ask myself repeatedly. I said, okay, I'm not interested, but what would make me interested in this scene?
That's a great question, though. I mean, even as a writer.
What would make me interested in this scene? And I started to reflect, okay, so what are the given elements? I mean, it's interesting. I didn't ask this question 3 days before while I was still prepping. But, but you're thinking about a lot of other things. I had every other scene to deal with and all that other stuff. And then I thought to myself, okay, what does a priest do? Who is drawn to that job? And I thought, well, a priest is someone who gives spiritual guidance to his constituents, and he's there to be a sounding board, and he's there to offer compassion, and he's there to offer spiritual sustenance.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, if that were the guy I was seeing in this scene, I would be interested in him, not because now he's simply pitiable and kind of pathetic. Please like me, please come back. And I'm thinking, okay,
the director's words right there.
If he were really, and that's not far off from what sometimes the things you have to say to someone to say, what's your subtext? Because that sometimes is the subtext.
Yeah.
And the deeper intention, but I wouldn't rest at that, by the way. I want to go deeper. Why does someone so desperately need to be liked? But anyway, but then I thought, okay, what if he were actually plying his craft, fulfilling his mission in this scene? If his scene is to offer spiritual support to people, what if he were doing that? And I thought, let me look at the scene. And I looked at the scene carefully. I said, will the scene support it? And then a remarkable thing happened in this short window. This doesn't always happen, Geoffrey. This happened to be, one of his grace descended. But I looked at his words, and it was like, I thought, he had this relationship with Frank Langella. And I looked at the words. He says, he used to come to meet with me, and he said it was important to him that we meet.
Yeah.
That I find out these things.
Here's your subtext.
And I thought, well, wait a minute. What if Langella was in a spiritual crisis himself, could not admit it to anybody else because you don't talk about those things? And what if this was a special relationship to Langella because it was the only place he could confessed to his own misgivings about his life, his own empty spiritual existence, and was seeking and was actually getting something from this priest. And what if, this was a really exciting thing to me to think about, what if this priest, who is, I'm now saying, is an intuitive, empathetic human being, what if he sensed in Philip what we already know about him?
Yeah.
That he's in spiritual torment, that he himself is a lost character, that he was only half-heartedly performing this function.
Right.
This is his deeper subtext. So then I thought, what if he was sensing in Philip's need for spiritual guidance and empathy, and he was trying to convey to him, I was this role for Langella, and he could never talk about it, and I could be this role for you if you could only open up.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
then I looked at the words and I saw, all it is a change of subtext. And then I noticed the very last words when he offers him he says, will I see you again? It was important to Langella that I do, which he would then deliver in a very different way. He's trying to communicate because he can't come right out and say it.
What a shift.
Yeah. And then Matthew's answer was, no, I can't. And I thought, well, that could be justified if he kind of freaked out that this guy, if he senses the priest is seeing something in him, he would be kind of freaked out and get a little defensive, but no. And then the last words of the priest were, well, I will pray for you. And he said something about, I hope you'll try it because it can be a source of great consolation. And that in the earlier version was just kind of a pathetic attempt to still come to me, but now it became a deeper thing so that Philip played it, and once I told the actors this, they immediately loved it because it gave the scene subtext and it folded into the overarching story of the show. And moreover, the clincher of this, you can edit this down short if you want.
No, I gotta be honest with you, Dan. You're a master of your craft. Okay. And so listening to your process, which is in the book, is a privilege. So anybody who is listening to this show right now and taking in these anecdotes, I mean, you're in the mind of a master who's directed some of the best shows out there. So by all means, sir.
Well, then let me finish it up with what I love about this little story, because what I found so thrilling for me was not just that I made it about something I could care about. I also helped the next episode because the next episode, Philip needs someone to marry him. He wants it to be a meaningful experience. So he's established a meaningful connection with this person who is going to preside over it. And so that to me is the great thrill when you can assist in the storytelling, not just in the present moment that I'm supervising, but going forward, enriching those moments.
I mean, it's absolutely amazing. The book is Directing Great Television, and there's plenty of anecdotes like this in there. Dan, I got to say thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
God, I don't know.
You're on the spot.
Talking about this stuff. I mean, look, I wrote a whole book and I felt like everything I put in there was interesting to me. So there's a lot of stuff I love talking about in this field. I would just say, maybe I'll just add one thing because it occurs to me. It's like, I think, what's exciting to me not is about storytelling is that it's really a window. There's self-discovery is involved in it. It's like you have to figure out what is important to you. And if there's one kind of touchstone I have that I learned early that it guides me as much as I can remember to be guided by it, is asking myself the question in every creative decision, how does this make me feel?
I love it.
From a performance or from a plot issue or from a writer, when a writer writes something, it's like it's not like a decision always. It's not just that makes sense because that's good because I know this is true and that's true.
Yeah.
Just how does it hit me? And it's like the lovely thing about the process in any art, I think, is it's like it goes deeper than your conscious, image of yourself or anything else, if you can just consult how does it land within me?
Yeah.
And if it's either it's exciting and I know it's the right direction, or am I happy with it, like I was with this explanation for what was going on in the scene. But then you ask the question, well, what would excite me? What would?
I love that, man.
So it's such an interesting process of acquiring self-knowledge, self-awareness, and self-exploration.
You're absolutely true. And to do this in a script when you're writing, to even go scene by scene, how is this making me feel? How would I be excited about this? That can change your script. It really, that's just amazing.
And moreover, can I piggyback on one last thing there? Because it's so exciting.
Absolutely not, sir.
Jeffrey, I got to say, it's exciting talking to you about this, because I find a kindred spirit here.
Of course. So going scene by scene, what does this do for me?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the other fascinating thing to me about storytelling is not just monitoring your own feelings about what's at issue, but being able to hold simultaneously an awareness of what the overall story is and what exactly the audience has been able to absorb and assimilate at each moment, so that you can make sure they're best prepared to receive the next moment. It's like I have to be part inner explorer, and then also part storyteller, but also part audience. Because so many moments don't land, not because maybe they're not well acted or well shot, but because the audience simply isn't prepared for it yet. They don't know what to associate to what's going on. They're not able to understand even what is at issue unless you have done the work to lay the groundwork, set the context, tee it up for them so that they can understand it when it happens.
This is like mind-blowing advice, people. He's talking macro arc stuff now, and like a dominoes effect of each scene falling into place to set up for that really satisfying moment. Or even if you look at endings, right? If you look at an ending of a film that just kind of biffs it, and say you have a film that's going really well and then it ends in a fart, it's because it wasn't set up properly, right, to really pay off that big ending. And I've seen,
you can another way to think about it. I've often, you learn this through, I have a chapter called The School of Hard Knocks. You're going to get hit upside the head a few times. But one thing I've learned is it's like, we as the storyteller know far more about the story than the audience. They only know what we either tell them or set them up to infer.
Yep.
It's, so it's like, if someone tells a joke badly, they know it's a funny joke. And they say, and they say the punchline, and they might find it funny because they know all the things they didn't bother to tell the audience, So.
Oh my God, that's absolutely perfect. All right, thank you again, sir.
All right, thank you, Geoffrey.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share in your social media, where you can tag us at The Successful Screenwriter.